What's up, my friends? Welcome back to another podcast. My name is Mike Perrine. This is the Everyday Detox podcast, and I am in Ashland, Oregon right now, where I'm getting a much-needed break from New York City, getting a little rest in, getting the behind-the-scenes work for Vitality New York City and for this podcast and for our entire platform done. And it's a stark contrast between New York and Ashland, Oregon, I'll tell you that. Here, it's streets lined with beautiful flowers, beautiful trees, fresh air, lots of hippies in the best way possible. Lots of hippies reading poetry on the street, playing music, beautiful organic food at farmers markets. And then there's New York City, which is very exciting in its own right, but a much, much different type of energy. And since I opened Vitality, which is located in the heart of New York City in Midtown Manhattan, I'm in Midtown all the time, and I don't know if you guys know what Midtown Manhattan is like, but energetic is a very kind way to say it. But it's exciting. And our little 1,100 square foot studio where we do colon hydrotherapy, cryotherapy, infrared saunas, nutritional counseling, and we have a whole product shop. That is my little sanctuary. I just love that space so much. So when I'm out here in Oregon, where, by the way, I've actually moved. So my fiance lives in Ashland, Oregon, and we've been doing a long-distance relationship, and now I live in Ashland, Oregon. All my stuff arrived just a few days ago, and I visit and work in New York City, which is very exciting for me. I spent my whole life in New York City, so I prefer this at this point in my life. And when I'm out here, I get all the behind-the-scenes work done, and I've been going deep in on Wim Hof breathing. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Wim Hof, but if you're not, you definitely want to get on that. He's a remarkable person, and been doing Wim Hof breathing, cold showers, getting back into my yoga practice, just really taking time because I've been in a real struggle for time trying to run the studio where things are growing, but there's been some growing pains, particularly on my end when it comes to my health and sleep and time and things like that. So I'm catching up on podcasts. This podcast was recorded, I believe it was late winter, early spring this year, so it's taken me a few months to get this out. And I sat down and did an interview with Aliyah Washington, who is a life coach and a nutrition coach, and she has a private coaching group, and she asked me if she can interview me to talk to me about how I got into this lifestyle. I've been vegan for 24 years. I've been eating organic primarily for 24 years. I haven't taken a pharmaceutical or recreational drug for over 24 years. And there's a whole dedication to my professional career to clean living and my personal life as well, obviously. So she wanted to speak to me about that because her coaching is very much in alignment with that. And it was an interview that started out talking about my beginnings and how I got into this. And it kind of evolved and moved into this area of speaking about how someone goes, particularly myself, but in general, how someone moves from a collapsed consciousness to an expanded consciousness. And we talk about what that means. And I love conversations like that. We also talked about the role of suffering in that process and how one can use suffering as a tool for growth. So this was a really exciting podcast for me with Aliyah's permission because it's a private group I did this interview for. I asked her if I could use it as a podcast. She said yes. So here we are. So I hope you guys like this one. Let's jump right in.
Because this is one of the most impactful things that we have to share. Like, even though we're nerds and we've studied all these things and you've studied all these things and you've done all this stuff, your story is still the most important and most impactful thing that you have to share with everybody on the planet. And so for the people out there who know that there's something with this body, that wanting to connect spiritually, wanting to connect emotionally, wanting to have deeper mental clarity and know that they have gifts and talents and abilities that are laying dormant within them, and knowing that the body has something to do with it, this is why I want you on, because this is exactly what you're doing and this is the life you're living. So thank you for being here, and that's why you're here.
Thank you. This is exciting for me. I take it all very seriously. I've dedicated almost all of my adult life and profession to the pursuit of clean living.
And it shows, and you're going to tell us about that. So let's back up, go all the way back to the beginning. What was your life like as a child growing up before this life?
We are going back to Staten Island, New York City. which I just read recently, which I take a little bit of offense to, but it also makes like perfect sense. I was reading the bio of a friend of mine that's a filmmaker, and he has this very successful film out right now. And I was reading, he had this bio written about him in a film festival, and it said that he was from Staten Island, New York, which is sometimes known as the armpit of New York City, which in some ways it is, but it was an incredible place. Like I really like reminiscing. I get very nostalgic about Staten Island. I have a friend who's a very famous actor. He was on a show called Sons of Anarchy, and I ran into him a couple of years ago, and he was telling me about how he's moving back from LA and buying a house in Staten Island. And I'm like, yeah, that makes total sense, like, because it's amazing and it's incredible. It's not an armpit. It's awesome. He could live anywhere he wants in the world, and he's living in Staten Island because it's this really incredible place. But I grew up, I had an amazing family, still do have an amazing family. So I grew up in this really incredible, loving family, very well taken care of. But growing up in New York City, because Staten Island is part of New York City, I also went to school and hung out in New York City, Manhattan. There were a lot of bad influences around me, a lot of bad influences in Staten Island in the 80s and 90s. And I was making a lot of bad life decisions when I was very confused, and I know this now in retrospect, but trying to find some type of significance. And, when you're a young man, just getting a job or getting a good education for me wasn't, it wasn't as exciting as doing bad things. So I was drawn more to doing bad things, and I was making bad decisions, and it was leading me down a road of bad decisions with food, bad decisions with substances, and bad decisions with a lot of people I was hanging out with. So that's where we start with a very collapsed consciousness. It's interesting. Like there was always this seed that sat in me where I always appreciated ecology. I always loved the woods. I loved doing things in nature. I loved animals. I loved people, but I didn't really know how to interact with that. And being a young man, I was very affected by the other influences like television or other people or older kids or things like that. So I always had that seed in me, but really when I started to get lost and confused, it was a very collapsed consciousness. So I did things that were very abusive to my body, and I did things that did not foster good relationships with other people. That collapsed consciousness turned out to be very valuable for me because finding my way out of that was this tremendous magical experience that it really transformed who I was and how I showed up in the world. And I still look back at that time and I'm just in awe of the person I was at that time, because I see so many people now, like I see people I grew up with that are still kind of wrapped up in a lot of bullshit. And I'm like, wow, 30 something years later, they're still like wrapped up in that stuff. And so I don't even take credit for that time period when I got pulled out of that. And I pulled myself out of that. It was really magical for me.
And essentially, right, like you just stated, heading down a path that a lot of people stay on. Like even if they kind of clean themselves up and get a job or kind of get their shit together on some level, right? It's that collapsed consciousness that stays being the through line for the rest of life, right? So maybe we're not as wild or as crazy as we were as teenagers, but we've carried that pattern and that habit of being collapsed in on ourselves and numb and not aware on as we go on, right?
And collapsed meaning not expanded. Like there's people like I have friends that I grew up with that are just involved in something that seems so very innocent, but but the pattern has gone on for so long, and it's like They still smoke cigarettes. They still drink every day. They still eat way too much American food, and their bodies are getting destroyed. But it's that collapsed consciousness, meaning they never have that expanded awareness where they go, oh shit, maybe my body is the biggest gift of the universe and I should take better care of it. Or, maybe I should think about all of these animals I'm putting in my mouth, and no shade on them. They might be great parents. They might be, but they live in that paradigm where the consciousness is not expanded to really take it all in and go, wait, maybe there's a whole lot more maybe there's a better way I could be showing up in the world. But instead, let's go down to Duffy's Tavern and get drunk again and, and tell fart jokes and then feel like shit the next day and watch our bodies slowly decline and, age rapidly. That's what a lot of people do. And it's so sad when you think about how amazing it is that we're even alive and that our consciousness has manifested in the universe. And it's that's what we've come to. And it's this really strange thing, Ali. It's nobody's really doing anything wrong other than allowing their paradigm to continue to tell the story, their lifelong story, and they continue to act in it. It's that's what the greatest tragedy is.
And we'll talk about this as we go on, but we can see that it's all just rooted in pain. It's rooted in I'm in pain and life is painful and I don't know what else to do other than to stimulate and to numb myself. And it's again, right? It's the chicken and the egg thing, right? Because it's the expanded awareness that helps you to heal these things, but it's also that expanded awareness that you get when you stop doing the things. So it can be a bit of a sticky, tricky thing, because in order to get the expanded awareness that can help you see that there is something else, you have to do things that are out of alignment with what you're used to doing. Mm-hmm. And so people can get trapped in it. So this is where I want to say with you. So when you say, right, I don't take credit for what lifted me out of that life. Let's talk about that. What's that story?
That was me, looking back. So, I was in I think about how challenging it was. And I look at how adults now are really challenged breaking the patterns that I broke. And I broke so many. I was addicted to alcohol and cigarettes, and I was able to break them. I was addicted to bad food. I was able to break it. I was addicted to sedating myself with television, just mentally. And I totally broke it and started educating myself and expanding my awareness. And it's what 17, 18-year-old has that I've encountered? Not many. Those are really special kids. So I look back at that time and I'm like, wow, you were just totally lifted out of that. And I always tell people, it was just divine intervention. I could have just kept going down the same path, but something inspired me so deeply that I was oh, I need to make these changes, even though they're really difficult, and entered into the difficult nature of those things.
And, I call that being called, or this path choosing you. There's just something that happens where you're there's no other option. I can't not do this.
The reason I even got into all this stuff and cleaned everything up, the defining thing, aside from that seed I talked about that was always in me, that desired peace and loved nature and was infatuated with ecology, aside from that seed already being somewhere in me, with all of the cloudy murkiness of the darkness, the dark decisions I was making and the confusion and all that stuff around me, I picked up a book one day. It was the autobiography of Malcolm X. And it was a very intimidating book to read for me at that time. I committed to reading it cover to cover. If I didn't understand a word, I looked it up. I did not let a sentence go by that I did not understand. And when I read about Malcolm X's life, I just had this truth moment where I was you are some white kid that comes from a good family, and you look at what Malcolm X did with his life, with everything that was stacked against him, and you have no excuse not to show up better, whatever that looks like. And for me, I was okay, so what does that look like? And I started doing things. I just started, we all know, what we could be doing better. I even know what I could be doing better now. That's one of the things that they teach at Institute for Integrative Nutrition, which is a very cool program. It's a nutrition program, but they teach you that your clients already know what they need to do. So I already knew what I needed to do. Everybody knows the first 3 to 5 things they need to be doing to take care of themselves. And it started with you need to stop smoking. You need to start eating better. You need to stop drinking. You need to stop associating with certain people. And even down to you need to stop biting your fingernails. because my finger, I used to have like a lot of anxiety and like nervous energy and wreck my nails. And I was like, start with that. And I started with that.
Okay, so the two really huge things there. The first thing that I want to say is like, right, that you maybe didn't have the vision for exactly who you're going to become, but you knew the first couple of steps.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is so huge for people, because so many people will have that feeling like what you just said. I know that I should be doing something better. I know there's something more. I know there's something more to me. But because I don't know how I'm going to get from A to Z, I'm not going to start, or I'm not going to do it, because I don't know what the whole thing is going to look like. And I think what you just said there is so powerful, is that you were willing to do just the steps that were shown to you. And now let me ask you this. If your consciousness back then had revealed to you what this whole thing was going to look like, and every step you were going to have to take, and how difficult this was going to be, would you have done it?
Yes, because it was so worth it. And it was so exciting. Now, here's another part too. There was a lot of difficulty, but the great part is there was an enthusiasm and an excitement to every step. Like the people I was meeting, the ideas I was coming into contact with. It was just like the most thrilling time. It turned into something really wonderful. Now, did I used to have a handwritten calendar where I used to write down how many days I've been smoke-free, drug-free, alcohol-free? Yes, because it was this thing that I was having to overcome. It was this thing that was kind of gnawing at me because there were physical and mental addictions that played into it. So was that challenging? Yeah, that was definitely challenging. But there was something so exciting about seeing my body change, but also seeing my consciousness change. It was like I totally had this different relationship to how I wanted to show up in the world.
That's a fabulous point, and I really let's emphasize that. You took the steps that were hard and challenging, but there was reward within every step.
Yeah, there's this really cool phrase that comes out of Islam, and I don't have any connection to it other than the fact that I read the autobiography of Malcolm X, and I actually studied his life for many years. I've read probably 15 books on his life. I really got into his life, and there's so many different angles to it. I have no connection to Islam or any religion or anything like that. But there was this very cool phrase that came out of the autobiography of Malcolm X, and it said, if you take one step towards Allah, Allah will take two steps toward you. And really, if we just kind of like break that down into positive energy, which is the way I thought it, which is the way I interpreted it, is as soon as I started eating better, which is not just about eating, it's about how we show up in the world, right? It's a huge choice about how animals are treating, how we respect the environment, how we respect our bodies. So once I started eating differently, and once I started leaving certain things out of my body's chemistry and also out of my emotional chemistry, the amount of steps that positivity took toward me was incredible. Like all the right people showed up. All the right situations showed up to support me for what I was doing. I was attracting the right things and the right people for my life. So I always like kind of took that analogy and I went like, yeah, I kind of felt like, if we just like broadly stated as like the universe came rushing into me when I opened myself up to the positive vibes of the universe.
This is exactly where I wanted to go with this, right? Is that what you started to notice is that as you took the steps to take responsibility for yourself and what you could do right here, right now, to make yourself the best version of yourself that you could become right here, right now, the doors opened for you. Mm-hmm. The resources showed up, the people showed up, the joy showed up, the peace showed up, that there was a removal of the blocks that were holding you back from being this person. As you took the steps you could take, there were things that were intervening on behalf of you to lead the way. And it was this alchemical thing that happened where you chose to take the step. You chose to do the thing, the hard thing, to give up alcohol. You gave up cigarettes. You liked those things. They had a place in your life. They were there for a reason. You knew they weren't serving your highest purpose. So you took the hard step and you were essentially, like I say, rewarded every single step you took. And I think this is a huge part I really want to get across to people is that it's not about knowing the whole thing, and it's not about life is going to be a horrible slog until we're actualized. It's when you're on the right path and you're really doing the things that you know you need to be doing, it's going to feel good. Even when it feels bad, it's going to feel good. There's going to be a magic to it. There's going to be an energy to it that is part of what makes this lifestyle something that you do forever. Does that resonate?
Yeah, because it brings you into alignment with your purpose, right? Now, I don't know if everybody's purpose is this. Like, I don't know if Kurt Cobain's purpose was to be like a raw foodist, or like, no, maybe his purpose was to create the music he created and create that, that experience. But if somebody's listening to this, or they're watching one of my podcasts, or they're reading a book and it's turning on something in them, this is more probably in alignment with what their purpose is. So yeah, when you start taking steps towards it, everything starts lining up and it's magical.
So the first lesson from this guest lecture is, you know what you need to do it. Because this is how these things start to come together, right? It's not wait for the resources, wait for the magic, wait till it feels good, wait till you get the feeling. It's, you know what you need to do. Take the step, then the thing will show up. This is what we need to realize. And if you're like, I don't know what to do after this, it doesn't matter. Do what you know you need to do now, and the next step will come after that. So that's beautiful and perfect, and the most important underline of this lecture. Okay, so now thing number 2 we want to go into is that you knew that you were here to be better. All right? This is huge, and I know that everybody watching this feels the exact same way. That there's a call that we're supposed to be better. And like you just said, it isn't for everybody. Not everyone's going to have this. But the people that do, we need to answer that call.
There's no alternative. Like I could have had a much more convenient life if I did not get involved in this. I would have had so much more money in the bank if I weren't like working in professions that paid almost nothing at times because of my ideals, spending all that money on organic food, chasing down all of these people to get this, next level body work, putting money into a podcast that makes me nothing, you do it because there's no other choice.
So back then, when you were first getting started, did you have a vision for this person that you knew you were going to become? Or was it more like closer to home where you actually were? Like, I can see myself as being a non-smoker and a vegan and all these. Like, did you see that you were going to become this person that you are today? Or was it much cloudier than that?
No, I didn't have as much foresight. The world moved a lot more slowly then. There was no internet. There was no phones. I mean, people were, call waiting was a big deal. So, it was, I kind of, I was young and I didn't have that much experience in the first couple of years. So like, no, I didn't have that much foresight other than I thought, I knew that I was really wanted to be vegan. And I wanted to help animals. And I was part of a lot of those organizations. I took every organization in the back of Diet for a New America. I took a big stack of index cards and I signed up for every one and I sent them out. I think I was on like 50 organizations. I think for like years until my parents sold their house, I think they were still getting mail from like Farm Sanctuary and like all these places. So I knew I wanted to be someone that was helping animals, that was involved in the organic foods movement. And very shortly after I became involved in food, and not only did I love the ideals of organic, vegan, and local food culture, where I got a lot of that from Angelica Kitchen, where I worked for 8 years. But not only was I involved in that, but I really loved food as a chef from a chef's perspective. And like I did that for a long time. And I thought I was going to do that. I thought that's what my contribution was going to be completely, was being a chef and owning restaurants and creating that type of atmosphere where other people can come to eat and exchange ideas and evolve in the way, that we're interested in evolving in the same way I did with the same type of ideals.
Okay, cool. So up to that point, right, when you're working as a chef and food is a big part of it, what was the evolution that had taken place in your consciousness that you were wanting to share with people?
Well, when I read, I read the autobiography of Malcolm X, and I started cleaning up, and I got through all the substances and cleared myself of that. I started educating myself. I read the book called Diet for a New America. I don't know if you're familiar with that book. Are you?
Oh yeah, that was the first book I read too.
Such an incredible book. John Robbins, who was the son and the heir to the Baskin Robbins ice cream company. He wrote this book called Diet for a New America, where he knew there was an issue. I don't know where his awareness came from, but he knew that there was some issue with the way Americans were eating and disease. And then his family's like, "Hey, John," and he got a great relationship with his family. And they're like, "Hey, John, we're giving you the ice cream company, whatever." And he's like, "No, I can't take it." I mean, talk about living on purpose, like millions and millions of dollars and huge empire, getting your life handed to you. And he's like, "No, I'm going to go live." I think he lived on like some little island off the coast of like Washington State or Vancouver or something like that. And he like lived there with his wife and was homesteading and wrote a book about referencing all of the studies from Journal of the American Medical Association, Lancet, and all of the medical journals at the time. And he wrote a book showing the correlation between diet and disease, pesticide residues in food, and really highlighted the way animals were treated in slaughterhouses and factory farms. I didn't know anything about this. So when I started reading this book, I was vegan in like 4 days. I was just like mind blown. I was also like 19 years old, and I was that exact age where like that idealistic college years where like I was ready to take on the world. And I was so pissed that I didn't know any of this shit. Like I was so pissed that I'd sort of been sold a lie, even though I don't get really wrapped up in a big conspiracy about it. Like I just think everybody's caught up in the paradigm. Like my high school teachers, I don't blame anybody, but I was like, at the time I was super angry about it. I was very preachy. And where were we going with this? I'm telling the story about John Robbins. What was your question?
My question was, what had taken place in your consciousness that led you to the food thing?
Yeah, so once I became aware of all that stuff and became very rapidly educated, I started recognizing things. And it wasn't just, first it was just what I was reading and kind of being, fed from these books, from these organizations I started joining. But then I started to think differently. So I'll give you an example. My son, I had my son at a very young age. My son is 27 years old now. And he's, one of the things I taught him how to do was to fish. And I thought it was the greatest. I loved fishing as a kid, and my father taught me how to fish. And I taught my son how to fish. He's so hardcore into it now. Like he moved to Maine. He just fishes on lakes and in the ocean. He's like so into fishing. But so it was really cool because in the 90s when he was growing up, I was like, oh, instead of plopping him down in front of like a Sega or a Nintendo, which was what kids were playing at the time, and always having him indoors, it's great because he'll go fishing at midnight. Like when he was a kid, he loves it so much. So I was like, I could take him out and we could be out in nature doing like naturalist type things, which is fishing. So I thought this is a great thing. I'm connecting with my son. I'm out in nature. He's not sitting in front of a console playing a video game. I thought like I'm totally winning as like a parent. And then I realized one day I recognized the suffering in the fish. And I recognized that the suffering was originating with me because there wouldn't be any suffering if I weren't out there fishing. And I thought, this is interesting. Like, what do I do with this? Because now I have to kind of give up so much, right? Because now, like, I still took my son fishing. I didn't start like putting all my stuff on him, but I didn't fish with him anymore. And it was sort of like, it was a sacrifice. But I recognized that, I'm trying to decrease and not contribute to suffering in the world. And here I am creating suffering. I'm actually creating it for another creature. And I was like, wow, okay, so there's a very different way of looking at things. And I walk down the street now and I see those little rings that get stuck around turtles and around birds' necks and stuff. And if I pass it by on the street, I think, how did you just show up right now? There's a creature that may suffer because of that. Take a second and a half, bend down, pick it up and cut it in half and throw it in a garbage can, So it's just a very different way of connecting to the world. And it started by eating clean. A lot of the way I started thinking was not even I got into it originally. I was educating myself and I wanted to change my body around. I was about 60 pounds heavier than I am now. I looked horrible, had all sorts of digestive upsets, definitely had a toxic liver from all the drinking I did, binge drank for years. And all I knew was that soy milk had no cholesterol and I should go buy soy milk. The vegan thing had been talked about to me a little bit from friends that were part of the hardcore music scene. In the 90s, veganism was a thing in that movement. So I kind of had a little bit of something about it, and I just knew they drink soy milk. Soy milk has no cholesterol. That's a good thing. I didn't know anything about it. I don't recommend soy milk for people these days. Really, it's a very processed food actually, but that's all I knew. And when I started eating cleaner, started eating salads, started eating more plant foods. And my consciousness started to change. I just wanted to get rid of the beer gut and I wanted to get back into shape and I wanted to get healthier. Like that was my first thing. And then once I found myself in a health food store and read Diet for a New America, boom, like my brain lit up. But that way of thinking happened from eating plants and cleansing. And it's interesting. In a lot of spiritual traditions, I think in the Bible, I think it's 52 times or 53 times, they mention fasting and prayer. They do that in Islam too. Fasting, which we know opens up a lot of pathways in the body for detoxification. It's included with time for prayer and reflection in a lot of religious traditions. And I think it's one of the wise things that comes out of those ancient texts, because there's something happens that when our body chemistry on a physical level cleanses, we're more receptive to God energy, whatever that looks like for somebody. I can't explain it. Dr. Bishy's like deep into this. He's done so much praying and fasting. He's fasted himself down to like 88 pounds on water. And like, he's like the PhDs, he's a literal PhD, but I mean, he's like the PhDs of the cleansing world. Yeah, there's really something about that.
The point that I really want to underline there is that you essentially said, as you started to cleanse your cells, you started to become aware of the suffering that you were causing. So you were saying that you were angry at the injustice of the meat and dairy industry, and that you had been living this life that was inherently destructive, not just to yourself, but to the planet. And you knew no other way. Is that correct?
Yeah, and it felt very normal because, hey, it's what mom and dad do, and they're good people. It's like I'm not a judgy vegan like I was in the first few years because, I see myself in everybody. And I don't have some big vegan agenda, just so anybody listening. I actually believe humans are omnivores and, I don't have a big vegan agenda, but I think it's a brilliant opportunity for us to evolve spiritually because we now have all the tools to live a vegan lifestyle. But I'm a lot less judgy because I see myself in that. Like, people do what their parents did. People do what the entire paradigm does. I mean, you go to the restaurant, all the nice people are there. There's like, it's not like this evil, dark thing. And you just wanted to have a hamburger. You just want to have a hamburger. It's not, but that's when we live in the paradigm and we don't have the expanded awareness to break through it. And then you see everything. There's this, Dr. Bishy told me something once because you were talking about the sensitivity and people being light workers and people that are just ultra sensitive and aware of, I mean, look, the world's on fire and it's been on fire since I think I was a kid. There's always stuff going on. There was Chernobyl and there was like all these things that in war and all these other things that had gone on. But nowadays we're very aware of it because of technology, but I think things are escalating. And it's easy to become very aware of all the suffering. And it used to feel really overwhelming to me, but Dr. Bishy is a very spiritual man. We've had a lot of conversations about spirituality. He's a mentor to me. He's 88 years old now. For anyone that doesn't know who Dr. Bishy is, he's a clinical nutritionist from Staten Island, New York, very proper Italian gentleman. He wears a jacket and tie and he's got a heavy Staten Island accent, and he's been a raw foodist for well over 50 years, I think almost 60 years. He's 88 years old, and he does some work at Vitality with us. And anyway, he said to me once, he said, Michael, it's a fallen world, and it's supposed to be. He's like, it's supposed to be for our benefit. We're in this place of suffering. I remember I was just talking to Bex on another podcast and on one of her videos about suffering when I was like at this time, when we go back down the road and I'm telling you about this time in my life, I used to go to bookstores because gadgets and the internet were not there. And I used to go to bookstores to educate myself. And I didn't quite know like I was developing still, and I'd get all these books on Buddhism and like stuff the Dalai Lama had written, and I was just trying to like put like good stuff in my head. I didn't really have a connection to Buddhism or anything, but I thought this is good to read, And I knew that there were messages of nonviolence and compassion, so I was like, these are good things to read. And they used to talk about how life is suffering, and I used to think it was such a horrible message. I was like, I don't really connect to this. And it wasn't until probably like 5 or 6 years ago that I really got it. And I realized that, that this is a fallen world. It's a broken place. It's meant to be that way so we can have these experiences. And it's how my collapsed consciousness and my suffering allowed me to awaken to a new way of thinking, a new way of showing up. It allowed me to grow. The point, or my opinion of one of the points of life, of physical life, is for us to awaken into the truth of who we are, which is probably going to be a very different experience for everyone. But yeah, I think that's the point. That's why I don't get overwhelmed with the suffering. And when I see people suffer, I just go like, okay, and some people would say like, when they're like, oh, but your son doesn't eat like you, or or he's having these types of challenges, or like, does that really upset you? And I'm like, it doesn't, because that's his process. And like, he knows what my life's about. So if he ever wants to use it as inspiration. Now, if my son were like involved in some really dark shit with drugs or something, like, yeah, I'd get super involved in that. And I'd really do that. But as he goes through his life process, as he eats what he wants, or if he drinks too much, or if he, when he was smoking cigarettes when he was younger, like, I'm just like, look, it's his. It's his to figure it out. It's his to get sick, to decide that he doesn't want to be sick anymore. It's his, it's his to use and to learn from. You can't police everybody. Can't karma police everyone. You can't be the spiritual police or the vegan police or the food police. So I'm a lot more relaxed around everybody having their process and just trying to be a blessing to everyone that I'm in contact with.
And again, as you just said, it is for a reason. It is so that we can truly understand who and what we are, because we have had every experience of what we are not, and how powerful that is. Like when people say, do you really know happiness if you've never been sad? Do you really know joy if you've never been depressed? And I would argue that we don't, that we're not truly aware of that which is until we've experienced that which isn't. And so as you start to have this broader perspective of yourself, you can start to see that the suffering in the world doesn't have to be so crippling. Yeah? That when we're this sensitive and we're waking up, and especially we're cleansing ourselves, we're going to become more aware. We're going to become more awake. We're going to feel it more. However, it doesn't have to mean that the world is exploding and we have to save it. Right? So long as we can start to see suffering through this expanded perspective, that it's the opportunity of a lifetime to suffer, because it's showing us deep sides of truth that we would never know without it. And so, as you say, there's this balance of I'm going to be the most benevolent thing that I can be on the planet without ever trying to rob somebody of their experience of suffering, because I understand the benefit of it.
There's a phrase that I hope I do justice to it. I heard it from Tony Robbins and from another one of my, from a friend of mine named David Mahler, who's on one of my podcasts coming up. It's that the purpose of pain is not to suffer, it's to invoke action.
Pain alerts us to where we are opposing life. And we are all born into a world, into a body, right? We have these bodies that are not clean. They're not aligned. They're not completely conscious and awake and aware. We are born into a culture that's totally asleep. We're born into this pain. We inherited it because we're meant to do something with it. We're not, and I mean, like you say, I think there are a lot of people that are meant to have a lifetime where they do get killed by it, right? We suffer till we die. And I think that that's part of every soul's journey, is to have many, many lifetimes like that, probably.
Oh, I was going to say, when you think about the inherent suffering that we never detoxify out of our chemistry, the things that we don't cause, like losing the people that we love, struggling with our fears with death, those type of like just sort of inherent modes of suffering that humanity has to go through. it almost suggests that the spirit lives on, because otherwise what would the purpose be in that tragedy of being alive? Well, what it does is it allows us to awaken to the preciousness of our consciousness and of life, and to value people. Like, how much, do we take for granted people until they are sick or they're getting older, or, then all of a sudden, like, we really recognize the value in consciousness. So suffering is inherent to this process, whatever it is. Whatever this spiritual process is, suffering and loss are a part of it. And so is the joy and the amazing part, and the joy in evolving and all that. But they don't exist without each other.
Exactly. It's a constant process of the misalignment birthing the alignment. We say, okay, this pain is an alert that I'm out of alignment. So where can I change? And then when we come back into alignment, or we come into alignment for the first time, the suffering stops, because that's how it works.
It's being aware of the communication and being receptive to hear that from what's going on in our soul. I think that happens with a lot of people when they go to that job. I mean, look, it's happened with me even after I've gotten onto a path of evolving and being more aware, where all of a sudden, it's happening with me right now with New York City. And it's a struggle. It's like we're not in alignment anymore, and everything in my soul is communicating that to me. The last time, I'm in Ashland, Oregon right now. The last time I was here and I went to go back to New York, I had a panic attack before, and I had to delay my flight. I could have got on it, but there was something. My body knew what my mind and soul were trying to express, and my legs are trying to get me onto an airplane. This didn't happen at the airport. It happened the night before, but my body was getting ready to take me back to New York. My body was like, no fucking way. I eventually got over it and I worked through it because I have a business in New York, and I got there, but I recognized that I'm falling out of alignment with New York City. And we see this with people going to their jobs every day, or we see it, that communication, and our society and even our medical culture is built on shutting down that communication. So what I've noticed is, our bodies might communicate something to us about our digestion. We might start to have an issue with our body, our joints, headaches, digestive problems, and the medical system is designed to shut down that communication by removing symptoms. Sometimes it's designed to help heal things. I don't totally hate Western medicine, and I don't want anyone to get that idea, but a lot of our Band-Aids are used to shut down that communication. Netflix, is designed to shut down that communication. Well, actually, no. Let me take that back. It's not designed to. I think there's a lot of great creative stuff that's getting done there, but we use that to shut down the communication that we might hate our jobs, or we're not connecting with our spouse. There was a meme going around the other day. I don't remember exactly what it was. I saw it on Instagram, but it was something about should we break up tonight? It's like, nah, let's just watch Netflix for the next 2 years and then let it come crashing down. It's it's a very easy way to check out and shut down what our body and soul knows is right.
Yeah, that's absolutely it. And this again is the point of the cleansing, the physical cleansing. When we get into the cleansing, we hear the messages, and it's uncomfortable, right? We're used to numbing the pain, and we're used to stimulating ourselves so we don't feel the pain, because this is our interpretation of pain, that pain and suffering is wrong and bad. It means something has gone wrong, but we're not understanding that it's yes, something we're doing has gone wrong. It's not that life has gone wrong and let's ride this out until it goes away. And you're absolutely right. The body carries everything we've ever been through that has been unprocessed.
The name of my studio is Vitality, and it's from the equation V equals P minus O from Professor Arnold Ehret, where we base the foundation of all the cleansing work that we do. And running Vitality I started to lose vitality from running Vitality because of varying things, And my body started communicating that to me. Stress, lack of sleep, my spine going out of alignment a lot, being that which carries me through life. Yeah.
And also your conductor for information. Because we got to think of it like that. This is the nervous system. With this spine is everything. It's the communication from the head to the body to the head. And if we now understand, right, the body understanding what alignment is, the head can get us there. that being out of alignment, communication is crossed, we lose it. And it's because we're choosing to not hear, right? The spine going out of alignment, it's like, okay, well, cut off that message. I don't want to hear it.
You know, it's interesting. You can see things that Dr. David Mahler, who is a NSA practitioner, and he was my NSA practitioner. He was on my last podcast or 2 podcasts ago, and he works on Tony Robbins. He's very talented, and he stood me up in the mirror at one point, and he's like, "Look at where your head sits in relationship to your spine," and my head sits forward. And he's like, your head sits forward because you're anxious and you're worrying about money and business and you're leading with your head instead of being of alignment with your body. And I was like, whoa, you know, and it's like, it's fascinating for him. And he'll show you clients he's worked on where their head sits in different places. And after getting adjustments or entrainments, as they call them, the head goes back into alignment. And you know, they don't always last there until the thinking changes. And it's a balance between working on the body and working on the mind. And then eventually you get yourself back in alignment. But it's very cool.
Okay, so here's something that I'm going to put out there for everyone. If you go walking down the street and you see men who are in their 40s and over, you're going to notice that all of them look like this.
Mm-hmm.
And also, so everyone's got this thing. The head is way out ahead. The shoulders are way back. And then when they turn their head, they have to turn their whole body. They can't just turn their head. And it's exactly what you just said. It's being stiff-necked and anxious and worried, right? I'm dead set on doing my path the way that I'm doing it. There's no flexibility. And it's money. It's my head is all that matters. And you will see so many people in their old age, this is how they carry themselves.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned men too. I mean, this is men and women, but it's predominantly men. What do men try to do with their emotional states or things? We think our way through shit. Like we don't feel as much. When you go into, I feel like I'm a spokesman for the NSA work, but when you go into an entrainment room and people are getting worked on, the amount of vocalization and emotional stuff that goes on while their spines are getting worked on. And by the way, NSA work, it's not, they're chiropractors, but they don't do the adjustments with the snap, crack, pop, which I think there's still a little value in that too. But that's not what NSA practitioners do. NSA practitioners are doing very subtle movements, and they're unlocking physical, emotional states that are locked into the physicality, and it's very vocalized. There's a lot of like, there's like a lot of release. And a lot of emotion that gets set off in that room because they work on groups of people. It's not like one-on-one all the time. Sometimes it's 6 people at a time. Very cool. But men, we lead with we try to figure things out. We don't feel our way through. Like women are so much more gifted in that way. It's the beauty of the polarity between men and women. But when you get men in their bodies to feel what's in their bodies and to feel their emotion and to express emotion, it's fucking beautiful.
To kind of wrap this up, or to put an underline or an underscore of this conversation, you getting into this deep tissue cleansing has allowed you to see more, allowed you to feel more, allowed you to access more information. And that information has been what has empowered you to come deeper and deeper into alignment with yourself, the greater nature of you, and the individual nature of you. So this is why we do this work. Absolutely.
And on a physical end, it's like, yes, we want to be, who wants to have to go through disease processes that were a choice? It's not a very intelligent way to live. So once you become aware of that, you go, well, I wouldn't create that for myself. But also, when I talked about the inherent life, we talked about it being as inherent suffering, but the inherent life processes like having children, being with loved ones, losing loved ones, being there for other people, mentoring people, big brothering or big sistering, like those things that we really can put our attention to, we're going to do it a lot more effectively with a clean, healthy body. So, in the absence of disease, we're more of a benefit to people when we don't have to have them take care of us, and we could take care of others. The beauty is we age, and then we do need other people to take care of us, so we all share that beautiful process with each other. But so on a physical level, yes, it's important, but really why we do this is because of the way it affects our consciousness. So we want it to affect our consciousness in a way where we do have expanded awareness and we can show up in the world differently, more compassionately, better, in a state of evolution and expansion. And we want to be physically healthy so we can do it longer. And yes, we want to feel good and look sexy and do all that other cool stuff too, and we want to age really well, of course. So it's a combination of the two. But yeah, the one that really leads is the spiritual one.
All right. So yeah, I'm going to end the recording. And that is that. Thank you for listening. Have an awesome rest of your day, everyone who's listened, and we will see you later.
Okay, my friends, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I enjoyed talking to Ali. Next podcast, Dr. Fred Bishey dropped into Vitality, and Nick was on vacation. We started using GoPros to film the podcast. I hadn't quite figured out what the lighting situation was going to be. So if you watch it on YouTube, it was a total disaster, but I threw everything together. I captured the moment. It was a great one. So you can tune in for that. And until then, I'll see you guys next time.